The clang of steel still echoed in my ears when the funeral flowers hadn't even wilted yet. My husband, Thomas Caldwell, was gone after 40 years of building Caldwell Steelworks with me in Pittsburgh. I thought grief would be my only burden that week, but my son had other plans. Across the kitchen table, Ethan slammed his fist down so hard the coffee cups rattled. "You're just baggage now, Mom. Dead weight. I'm liquidating the factory. It's time to cash out." The words didn't sting like he thought they would. They burned, like molten steel being poured into a mold, shaping something harder inside me. Next to him, Lena, his wife, scrolled on her phone, smirking. "Flights to Dubai are already booked. First class. We'll celebrate while the lawyers handle the sale." They were talking about my life's work like it was a yard sale. The factory Thomas and I built from rusted machines and second-hand tools. The sweat. The nights I kept books by candlelight while he welded until dawn. And now my only child was calling it dead weight. I looked at him, his chest puffed out like a self-made mogul. He thought this was victory, his moment to step into his father's shoes. But Ethan never forged a single beam, never felt the heat of molten iron, never stayed up negotiating supplier contracts. He thought money was steel when in truth, steel is sweat and memory and legacy. I forced my lips into a smile, soft and almost sweet. "All right, Ethan, if that's what you think is best, good luck." Inside, my heart was steady, because what my son didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that Thomas and I had prepared for this very moment. Long before the cancer took him, my husband saw the greed in Ethan's eyes. Together, we had forged a plan as strong as the steel that carried our name. So I sat there, nodding, letting Ethan taste his hollow victory, letting Lena picture herself sipping champagne in Dubai. And while they celebrated their illusion, I already held the key that would shatter it all. For now, I played the part of the helpless widow. But deep down, I whispered to myself, "Steel bends under fire, but I don't." They would learn soon enough. That night, when the house was finally quiet and their car had disappeared down the street, I walked to the study Thomas and I once shared. The scent of old paper and machine oil still lingered. The smell of a life built by calloused hands and sleepless nights. In the corner stood the heavy safe, scratched with years of use. My fingers traced the familiar pattern of the dial, and with a soft click, the door swung open. Inside wasn't money or jewels, it was far more powerful. Neatly organized folders, contracts, deeds, and a thick binder with Thomas's handwriting on the cover. Contingency plan. He had known. He had seen the hunger in Ethan's eyes long before his final breath. Page after page laid it out. Caldwell Steelworks had never been in Thomas's name alone. Every asset, every account, every machine was registered under a marital trust. By law, I wasn't a widow left in the cold. I was the surviving co-owner. Ethan couldn't sell what he never had control over. And that wasn't all. Thomas had spent his last months gathering evidence, bank statements showing Ethan's generous salary without a single hour of work, ignored emails begging him to attend board meetings, testimonies from foremen who hadn't seen him set foot on the floor in years. Piece by piece, my husband had built a shield for me and a trap for our son. I closed the binder and let my hand rest on its leather cover. Thomas's presence filled the room, steady and unyielding. He had always said steel was strongest when forged in fire. Perhaps he had known this fire was coming, and he had tempered me for it. So I locked the safe, poured myself a glass of bourbon, and sat in his chair. Ethan thought he was flying high, planning to toast champagne at 30,000 feet, bragging about the fortune he believed was his. But when his plane landed in Dubai, he would discover that his victory was nothing but smoke. And when the smoke cleared, all that would remain was the truth. Caldwell Steelworks was mine. Ethan's voice came through the phone days later, loud and brimming with excitement. I could hear clinking glasses in the background, Lena's laughter rising above the hum of an airport lounge. "Mom, you should see this place," he bragged. "Champagne, caviar, this is how real success feels. Dad would have wanted us to celebrate big." I let him talk, the corners of my mouth curling as I stared at Thomas's binder resting on the desk beside me. He had no idea. By the time they touched down in Dubai, the fantasy was in full swing. Photos of Lena draped in silk scarves flooded social media. Hashtags about luxury life, and finally free. Ethan strutted through hotel lobbies as if he had already pocketed millions. They toasted to the future with money that would never exist. Then the first crack. At dawn, my phone buzzed with Ethan's name flashing across the screen. I didn't answer. 6 minutes later, it rang again. By the time the 11th call came, I picked up, my voice calm as ever. "Good morning, sweetheart. Up early for a vacation." On the other end, Ethan's tone was frantic. "Mom, there's a problem. The buyers are saying I don't have authority to sell the factory. Something about joint marital ownership. They think I'm scamming them." Behind him, Lena's shrill voice cut through, cursing lawyers, shouting about wasted money, demanding answers. I swirled the bourbon in my glass and said softly, "That does sound complicated." "They're threatening fraud charges." Ethan nearly shouted. "They're saying you're co-owner. How is that even possible?" I let the silence stretch, savoring his panic. Then I answered, steady as steel. "Because, Ethan, I was your father's partner. In business, in law, in life. Everything your father and I built belongs to both of us. And you never earned a single piece of it." The line went dead silent. For the first time in his life, my son had no comeback. Only the sound of reality crashing down around him, thousands of miles from home. They came back with faces like ghosts. Gone were the designer sunglasses and smug smiles, replaced by rumpled clothes, maxed-out credit cards, and a silence that hung heavier than Pittsburgh smoke in winter. Ethan dragged their suitcases into the house like a boy returning from a failed runaway. Lena stomped behind him, muttering about embarrassment and how dare they treat us like criminals. I waited in the kitchen, calm as a judge, bourbon glass in hand. When Ethan finally looked up, his voice cracked. "Mom, we need a place to stay. Just for a while, until we sort things out." I didn't flinch. "Your old room is available. $500 a month, due on the 1st. Lena nearly choked. "500 from your own son?" I set my glass down and met her eyes with steel. "He's not a boy anymore. He's a 36-year-old man, and men pay their way." Ethan lowered his head. "That's fair." Her mouth fell open, ready to fight, but he didn't. That was the first sign something inside him had begun to crack. The next morning, before the sun touched the steel mills, I stood over Ethan's bed. "Up, you start work today." He blinked, confused. "Work where?" "Caldwell Steelworks. 7 a.m. sharp. Jack Morales is waiting for you." Jack was our grizzled foreman, a man who'd spent 30 years breathing sparks and fire. He didn't care whose son Ethan was. He only cared if the kid could carry his weight. At the factory gates, the men watched Ethan with folded arms and hard stares. No more tailored suits. Just a helmet, heavy gloves, and a stained work shirt that looked foreign on him. Jack handed him a set of tools. "You ever lifted steel before?" Ethan swallowed. "Not really." "Then today's the day. Grab those beams and don't drop one on your foot. Steel doesn't care about your last name, boy." By noon, Ethan's arms trembled under the weight of girders, his shirt soaked in sweat. Blisters had already begun to form where soft hands met rough steel. Every mistake earned him a bark from Jack and a laugh from the crew. And Lena, she lasted 3 weeks of living like common laborers before she packed her bags, slammed the door, and left divorce papers on the table. Ethan stood in the doorway watching her car disappear. For the first time in his life, he didn't chase after money or comfort or a woman who promised him both. He just whispered, almost to himself, "I guess it's just me now." I watched from the kitchen window, my heart heavy but unyielding. The forge had only just begun to burn. The weeks that followed ground Ethan down harder than any lecture ever could. Day after day, he lifted, welded, hauled, and cut, his soft palms splitting open until they bled through the gloves. Every mistake was met with Jack Morales's sharp bark. One afternoon, Ethan misread a measurement and cut a beam 2 inches short. The clang when it hit the floor echoed like a gunshot. Jack's voice boomed across the factory. $40 of steel gone because you don't listen, Caldwell. You think numbers bend for you. The men snickered, waiting for Ethan to explode or storm off. But instead, he bowed his head and said quietly, "You're right. I'll pay for it out of my wages." That silence afterward was different. No laughter this time, just the sound of hammers and drills resuming. For the first time, Ethan had chosen humility over pride. Slowly, the crew began to thaw. They stopped calling him the boss's kid and started calling him just Ethan. Jack noticed too. One evening, he pulled me aside. "He's rough, Maggie, real rough, but he's trying, and he's listening. That counts for something." So I tested him. When a small contract came in, a steel railing and support structure for a pedestrian bridge, I handed the papers to Ethan. "This one's yours. You'll measure, order, manage the crew, and deliver on time." His eyes widened. "Alone." "Not alone," I said. "With guidance, but the responsibility is yours." Ethan spent nights hunched over blueprints in the study where his father once sat. He asked questions, filled notebooks with calculations, shadowed Jack on site to learn the rhythm of real work. When the project began, he stumbled, supplies delayed, a worker calling in sick, bolts misplaced. But instead of collapsing, he adjusted. He negotiated with suppliers, reassigned shifts, and picked up the wrench himself when hands were short. 2 weeks later, the railing stood firm against the Pittsburgh skyline. On the day of inspection, the city engineer nodded, satisfied. Solid work, better than some seasoned contractors deliver. Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow, and for the first time I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Pride. Not the hollow pride of inheritance, but the hard-earned pride of accomplishment. That night, he sat at the dinner table, exhausted but alive, and whispered almost like a prayer. "Maybe I can actually build something instead of just taking it." And in that moment, I finally saw a glimmer of the man his father always hoped he could become. Just when I thought Ethan was finding his footing, the blow came. A thick envelope arrived by courier, legal papers stamped with the seal of Allegheny County. A family. The Martins claimed Caldwell Steelworks had caused structural damage to their building during a retrofit project. $50,000 in repairs, threats of a lawsuit, and worse, rumors they'd take their story to the papers. Ethan paced our living room like a caged animal, the papers crumpling in his fist. "This could ruin us, Mom. If people think our steel fails, no one will touch us again." I leaned back, steady. "What do you believe happened?" "Jack swears the welds were flawless. Tony inspected everything twice. I don't think it was us." His voice cracked with something I hadn't heard before, conviction. "But without proof, it's our word against theirs." He had 3 choices: pay the claim and look guilty, fight in court and risk losing everything, or dig until he uncovered the truth. The old Ethan would have taken the easy way out, throw money at the problem and hope it disappeared. But this new version stared down the challenge, jaw tight. "I'll investigate," he said finally. "If it's our fault, I'll own it. But if it's not, I won't let anyone call us liars." For a week, he buried himself in the work. He studied blueprints, interviewed every man on the crew separately, pulled photos from the day of installation, even hired an independent engineer at his own expense. I watched him grow thinner, darker circles under his eyes, but his determination never faltered. Then one night, he laid a stack of photos across the kitchen table. "I found it. The damage hadn't come from our welds at all. It traced back to an old support beam installed years earlier by a cut-rate contractor. hidden beneath layers of renovation. The welds from our team were intact, strong enough to hold a bridge, let alone a commercial building. Ethan's hands trembled, not from fear, but from vindication. "We didn't fail, Mom. We did it right." The next day, he met the Martins face to face. Instead of shouting or hiding behind lawyers, he laid out the evidence calmly. He showed them the photos, the reports, the engineer's findings. Then, in a voice steady as forged steel, he said, "We're not responsible for this damage, but we'll help you file a claim against the party who is. And if the insurance won't cover the repairs, Caldwell Steelworks will step in at cost. Not because we have to, but because it's the right thing to do." The Martins stared at him in stunned silence. Then the husband whispered, "No one does that anymore." 2 weeks later, the insurance company admitted fault, the lawsuit evaporated, and the Martins hired us for a new project. Word spread through Pittsburgh like fire in a steel mill. Caldwell didn't just build strong steel, they stood by it. That night, Ethan slumped into a chair across from me. His face was pale, but his eyes glowed with something fierce. "I get it now. Reputation, it's the one thing you can't rebuild once it's gone." I raised my glass, my voice soft but firm. "Your father would be proud." And for the first time, Ethan didn't shrink from those words. He nodded, shoulders square, ready to carry the weight his father once bore. The lawsuit had barely settled when Ethan came to me one evening with a stack of papers. His hands weren't shaking this time. They were steady, purposeful. He spread charts, market reports, and projections across the kitchen table like a man laying down cards in a high-stakes game. "I've been researching," he began. "Steel isn't just for bridges and skyscrapers anymore. The future is in energy. Solar farms, wind turbines, lightweight infrastructure. Companies need steel that's strong but adaptable. We can build it." I studied him carefully. His hair was still dusted with grit from the mill, his nails rough from labor, but his eyes carried the same fire Thomas once had when pitching a new idea. "What are you asking for?" I said. "30,000 for specialized equipment and a team of 2 skilled workers. I'll run it as a separate division under Caldwell Steelworks. 3 months to prove it's viable. If I fail, we shut it down." His voice was humble, not demanding. Not the brat who once shouted about cashing out, but a man willing to be judged by his work. I leaned back, remembering nights Thomas and I had spent huddled over ledgers, terrified of the risk but too stubborn to quit. "Why this path, Ethan? Why now?" He took a long breath. "Because Dad always said steel should serve the future, not just the present. And because I want to build something real, not just inherit it." For the first time since Thomas's death, I felt the weight on my shoulders lift just slightly. "You'll have the funding," I said at last. "But understand me, this isn't about money. It's about proving you understand what Caldwell Steel means. Integrity, resilience, community." He nodded. "I do, and I'll prove it." The division launched quietly, almost humbly, with a single project: fabricating steel components for a small wind farm on the outskirts of the city. Ethan threw himself into it, working side by side with his crew, hauling beams, running tests, learning from every mistake. Within weeks, the results spoke louder than any speech. The project finished early under budget, and the client was so impressed they signed on for a second phase. Word spread. Caldwell wasn't just an old steel company clinging to the past. It was adapting, innovating, alive again. I watched Ethan stand before the workers one Friday afternoon, grease on his hands, sun burning across his shoulders. He wasn't just giving orders anymore. He was listening, asking questions, solving problems. When one young welder faltered, Ethan didn't scold. He crouched beside him, showed him how to steady the torch, and waited until the boy's hands stopped trembling. That night, as I looked out at the mill, sparks flying against the dark Pittsburgh sky, I whispered to Thomas's memory, "He's becoming the man you hoped for, maybe even more." 2 years after Thomas's funeral, I found myself back at the same kitchen table where Ethan once called me dead weight. But this time, it wasn't anger that shook the walls, it was pride. Ethan slid a bound proposal across to me. "It's time we expand again, Mom. Caldwell Steelworks is stable, the green division is thriving, and our name finally means something more than profit." I flipped through the pages. Scholarship funds for trade school students, partnerships with veterans organizations to retrofit homes, community steel projects designed to rebuild neglected neighborhoods, and at the very end, a foundation charter, the Margaret Caldwell Foundation. I looked up, startled. "You named it after me." He smiled faintly. "Because you were the one who held everything together. When Dad died, I thought I'd inherited a company. Turns out I inherited your strength, and I want the world to know where it came from." The boardroom announcement was small, just employees, a few local officials, and longtime clients. Ethan stood at the front, no longer the arrogant boy who once puffed out his chest, but a man with oil-stained hands and eyes that burned with conviction. "When my father passed," he told them, "I nearly destroyed what he built. I thought inheritance meant entitlement. I was wrong. My mother taught me that real legacy isn't money, it's values, it's community. It's steel strong enough to carry others. And today, in her name, we're creating a foundation to make sure no family in Pittsburgh is left behind when it comes to safe homes and opportunity." The room erupted in applause. My hands trembled as I held the documents he pressed into them. For the first time since Thomas's death, I felt peace. The company wasn't just surviving, it was becoming what we had always dreamed, a force for good, not just profit. That night, 3 generations of Caldwells sat in my living room. Ethan with grease still under his nails, his new partner Claire Jensen with plans for sustainable steel projects, and my tiny grandson asleep in her arms. Ethan looked at me across the firelight. "Do you think Dad would be proud?" I swallowed hard. "He would be amazed, not just proud, Ethan, amazed." He nodded slowly. "I almost lost it all. But you let me hit bottom, and then you made me climb. Thank you for loving me enough to let me fail until I learned how to succeed." I reached for his hand, rough and scarred from real work, and whispered, "Steel bends, Ethan. But finally you don't." And in that moment, I knew the legacy was safe. The boy who once tried to sell everything for champagne in Dubai had become the man who would carry Caldwell Steelworks into the future. Not by inheritance, but by earning every beam, every bolt, every ounce of respect. The foundation was mine, but the future, it was his.